Loneliness is often misunderstood. Society paints it as a failure, as if a woman who walks through life without a circle of friends is lacking something essential. But in truth, loneliness is not a mark of weakness. It is a quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. When a woman stands alone, she is not lost. She is learning to navigate the world with her own compass, to listen to her own voice above the noise of others' expectations. She discovers the ability to sit with her own thoughts without fear, to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, and to honor her own feelings without needing validation from anyone else. In solitude, she cultivates patience with herself, learning that the value of her presence is not dependent on how many people surround her. She learns resilience because she faces life's storms without the cushion of external reassurance, and in doing so, she builds an inner strength that is unshakable. Loneliness teaches her that being alone is not a punishment, but an opportunity to cultivate self-trust, self-respect, and a deep, unwavering sense of self-worth that no one else can give or take. Self-reflection is one of the most profound gifts a woman with no friend can give herself. In the absence of constant social interaction, she has the rare opportunity to turn inward, to look deeply at her own thoughts, feelings, and actions without distraction or judgment. She begins to notice patterns in her behavior, understanding why she reacts a certain way, what triggers her emotions, and what truly brings her joy or pain. Through this process, she learns to confront her fears rather than avoid them, to question beliefs that no longer serve her, and to examine the parts of herself that she may have hidden even from herself. Self-reflection allows her to take responsibility for her own growth, to acknowledge both her strengths and vulnerabilities, and to make intentional choices about how she wants to live. It teaches her that her inner world is rich and complex, that she doesn't need constant validation from others to know her worth, and that by understanding herself deeply, she can navigate life with clarity and purpose, creating a foundation of self-awareness that informs every decision, every relationship, and every dream she pursues. For a woman with no friend, boundaries are not just rules. They are lifelines, essential tools that protect her energy, her time, and her emotional well-being. She learns to recognize where her limits lie, understanding that saying no is not an act of selfishness, but an act of self-respect. Without the constant influence of others, she has the clarity to see which relationships are nourishing and which are draining, which expectations are fair and which are unreasonable, and which interactions serve her growth versus those that diminish her spirit. Boundaries become her allies because they create a safe space where she can thrive without compromise. She discovers that protecting her own needs does not make her unkind. Instead, it allows her to engage with the world authentically and intentionally. She learns to resist the pressure to conform, to overextend herself, or to seek approval at the cost of her peace. Each boundary she sets is a declaration of her worth, a statement that she values her time, her energy, and her inner harmony. In the process, she becomes disciplined in honoring herself, realizing that these invisible walls are not barriers to connection, but gateways to healthier, more meaningful relationships in the future, where trust, respect, and reciprocity are the foundation rather than expectation, manipulation, or obligation. A woman with no friend learns that connection is not defined by the number of people in her life, but by the depth and authenticity of the bonds she chooses to form. Without the constant chatter and influence of a social circle, she has the clarity to see that meaningful connection is rare, sacred, and worth waiting for. She begins to understand that true relationships are built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding, rather than convenience, obligation, or superficial companionship. In solitude, she learns to cultivate a connection with herself first, recognizing that self-awareness and self-acceptance are the foundation for any meaningful relationship. She notices the subtle ways in which people interact, the unspoken emotions, the intentions behind words, and she becomes more discerning about who deserves access to her heart and energy. Redefining connection means rejecting the societal pressure to conform to group norms or to surround herself with people just to feel accepted. It means valuing quality over quantity, presence over pretense, and depth over surface-level interaction. In this process, she develops an inner compass for relationships, one that guides her toward connections that uplift, inspire, and sustain her, while gently letting go of those that drain or diminish her spirit. She comes to realize that connection is not about filling a void, but about enriching life in ways that are intentional, authentic, and deeply nourishing, and that sometimes the most profound connections are those she builds with herself before ever seeking them in others. A woman with no friend learns the transformative power of self-compassion, discovering that the need for external approval is not the measure of her worth. In a world that constantly tells us we must be liked, accepted, and validated by others, she finds freedom in turning inward, offering herself the kindness, understanding, and patience that she may have once sought from friends. She begins to silence the critical voices that whisper doubt or shame, recognizing that her value is inherent and does not require affirmation from anyone else. Through self-compassion, she learns to forgive her mistakes, to honor her emotions, and to celebrate her own growth without waiting for applause or recognition. She becomes her own advocate, championing her needs, desires, and dreams, understanding that she deserves love and respect first from herself. This internal shift allows her to navigate life with greater confidence, resilience, and authenticity, because her sense of self is no longer tethered to the opinions of others. In practicing self-compassion, she also cultivates empathy toward those around her, recognizing that everyone struggles and that kindness begins within. She understands that seeking approval can lead to compromise, resentment, and loss of identity, while choosing self-compassion strengthens her connection to her own values, her own voice, and her own vision for life, allowing her to move through the world with a quiet, unshakable confidence and a sense of peace that no external validation could ever provide standing alone. Takes a type of courage that is often invisible to the outside world. For a woman with no friend, the act of facing life without the constant support, validation, or companionship of others requires a bravery that is quiet but profound. She steps into spaces where opinions, judgments, and expectations swirl around her, yet she refuses to compromise her values, her dreams, or her sense of self for the sake of fitting in. Courage in her world is not about grand gestures. It is about showing up each day, fully present, even when no one else is watching, listening, or cheering her on. It is about taking responsibility for her own happiness, decisions, and growth, knowing that the weight of solitude cannot break her unless she allows it to. She learns to embrace uncertainty without fear, to navigate challenges without leaning on someone else for reassurance, and to trust her own instincts even when the path is unclear. In standing alone, she discovers the depth of her inner strength, the resilience to face disappointment, rejection, and isolation without losing her sense of dignity or hope. She finds freedom in this courage because standing alone teaches her that she does not need constant affirmation to feel worthy, that her voice matters even when it is unheard by others, and that the ability to remain steadfast in her truth is itself a remarkable form of empowerment that shaped the way she approaches every relationship, opportunity, and choice in life. For a woman with no friend, introspection becomes a powerful tool for transformation, a mirror that reflects not only who she is, but also who she has the potential to become. In the quiet moments of solitude, she turns her attention inward, examining her thoughts, actions, and motivations with honesty and courage. She asks herself difficult questions about her past choices, her fears, her desires, and the patterns that have shaped her life. And she confronts the answers with openness rather than judgment. This practice allows her to recognize areas where she may have settled for less than she deserved, to acknowledge wounds that need healing, and to celebrate the strengths and resilience she has cultivated along the way. Through introspection, she begins to see connections between her experiences and her growth, understanding that every challenge, disappointment, or moment of loneliness carries a lesson meant to deepen her wisdom and self-awareness. She learns to pause before reacting, to consider the impact of her decisions, and to align her actions with her true values rather than the expectations of others. Introspection teaches her patience with herself, reminding her that growth is not linear, that mistakes are part of the process, and that each moment of reflection is an opportunity to learn, adapt, and evolve. By turning inward, she cultivates a life guided by intention, self-knowledge, and authenticity, building a foundation of strength and clarity that allows her to navigate the complexities of life with confidence, grace, and the quiet assurance that personal growth is a lifelong journey. She is capable of leading on her. A woman with no friend often develops a profound sense of empathy through observation, learning to understand people not through conversation or shared experiences, but by quietly watching the world unfold around her. Without the distraction of constant social interaction, she notices the subtle nuances in human behavior, the way a gesture can reveal unspoken feelings, the flicker of emotion in someone's eyes, or the patterns of thought that influence actions. She becomes attuned to both the beauty and the pain in others' lives, recognizing struggles, insecurities, and joys that often go unnoticed by those caught up in the noise of their own social circles. This careful observation allows her to see beyond superficial judgments and stereotypes, fostering a deep sense of compassion for people in all their complexity. She learns that every individual carries a story, often unseen, and that understanding someone fully requires patience, presence, and an openness to perspectives different from her own. Empathy through observation teaches her the importance of listening, not just with her ears, but with her mind and heart, and to approach others with curiosity rather than assumption. It equips her with a sensitivity that makes her a thoughtful confidante when genuine relationships do form, and it shapes her interactions in ways that are considered respectful and deeply human. She realizes that by observing without judgment, she is not only understanding others, but also learning about herself, her reactions, biases, and capacity for compassion, ultimately creating a bridge between her solitude and the richness of human connection she can choose to embrace when the time is right. For a woman with no friend, silence becomes more than an absence of conversation. It becomes a fertile ground where creativity takes root and flourishes. Without the constant chatter, opinions, or distractions of others, she finds the mental and emotional space to explore ideas, dreams, and possibilities that might have otherwise been drowned out. In this quiet, she begins to listen deeply to her own thoughts, noticing the patterns, sparks, and connections that only emerge when the mind is free from external pressures. Her imagination stretches beyond limits, allowing her to write, paint, create, or innovate in ways that are wholly her own, unfiltered and authentic. She discovers that silence is not emptiness, but a canvas waiting to be filled with her vision, a space where she can experiment, reflect, and transform fleeting thoughts into meaningful expressions. In this solitude, She develops an intimate relationship with her inner world, learning to trust the originality of her ideas and the depth of her insight. Creativity, she realizes, thrives not in the approval of others, but in the freedom to explore, fail, and try again without judgment or expectation. Each moment of quiet becomes an invitation to dream bigger, to imagine beyond the ordinary, and to cultivate talents that are uniquely hers. Through silence, she finds her voice, not the one shaped by social norms or validation, but the one that emerges from the deepest corners of her heart and mind, raw, bold, and unapologetically authentic. A testament to the extraordinary power that solitude can awaken within a woman with no friend often discovers the liberating power of releasing the pressure to conform, realizing that she no longer needs to mold herself to fit the expectations, opinions, or approval of others. In a society that constantly signals how we should look, act, and think to belong, she finds freedom in solitude, the freedom to honor her own values, desires, and identity without compromise. She learns to question the rules and norms that once dictated her choices, recognizing which ones align with her authentic self and which ones she adopted merely to gain acceptance. This release is not a rejection of connection, but a conscious decision to stop sacrificing her integrity for the sake of belonging. She begins to make choices based on her own truth, embracing passions, behaviors, and beliefs that resonate with her soul, rather than those dictated by peer pressure or social expectation. The process is empowering because it allows her to take ownership of her life, her decisions, and her voice, cultivating a sense of authenticity that becomes a guiding force in every interaction and every path she chooses. Releasing the pressure to conform also brings clarity. She sees who and what truly deserves her attention, energy, and presence, and she learns to walk away from situations that demand compromise or pretense. In shedding the weight of external expectation, she discovers an inner strength and freedom that allows her to live fully and intentionally, cultivating a life that is a reflection of her own values, her own dreams, and her own unshakable sense of self. Worth, a woman with no friend often develops a remarkable strength of emotional resilience, a quiet power forged in the fires of solitude and self-reliance. Without a support network to cushion her from life's challenges, she learns to navigate pain, disappointment, and uncertainty on her own, discovering that she possesses an inner reservoir of strength far deeper than she ever realized. Each setback becomes an opportunity to practice endurance, each moment of doubt a lesson in patience and self-trust, and each encounter with loneliness a chance to fortify her emotional foundation. She learns to acknowledge her feelings without letting them define her, to experience sorrow without being consumed by it, and to face fear with courage rather than avoidance. Emotional resilience teaches her that life's difficulties are not indicators of her weakness, but invitations to grow stronger, wiser, and more adaptable. She develops the capacity to bounce back from adversity with grace, to find meaning in struggle, and to transform challenges into stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. In cultivating this resilience, she becomes attuned to her own emotional needs, recognizing the importance of self-care, reflection, and boundaries, while simultaneously developing empathy for others who face their own trials. This strength allows her to confront life head-on, to maintain stability when circumstances are unpredictable, and to trust that even in moments of isolation or hardship, she can endure, adapt, and continue to move forward with dignity, confidence, and an unshakable belief in her own capacity to overcome whatever comes her way. A woman with no friend often finds herself facing the task of healing past wounds, confronting the pain, betrayal, or disappointment that may have shaped her experiences and her view of the world. In the absence of external voices to soothe, distract, or validate her. She learns to turn inward, examining the hurt with honesty, courage, and compassion. She begins to understand that unresolved pain can quietly influence her decisions, her relationships, and her sense of self-worth, and she takes the deliberate steps to acknowledge and process it rather than bury it. Healing past wounds requires patience, as she allows herself to feel the full spectrum of emotions: anger, grief, regret, and even relief. Without judgment or shame, she reflects on the circumstances that caused the pain, seeking understanding rather than blame, and gradually cultivates forgiveness, not necessarily for those who hurt her, but for her own liberation from resentment and bitterness. In this process, she discovers the strength that comes from vulnerability, recognizing that facing her own history is a testament to her resilience and self-respect. Healing teaches her to set boundaries that protect her from further harm, to trust her instincts, and to honor her own needs above the expectations or judgments of others. As she works through her wounds, she also uncovers the lessons embedded within them, the insights, growth, and clarity that transform past suffering into wisdom, compassion, and a deeper understanding of herself, allowing her to approach life with greater authenticity, courage, and emotional maturity. A woman with no friend discovers a profound freedom in the ability to choose wisely, understanding that without the influence or expectations of others, she has the power to shape her life according to her own values, priorities, and desires. This freedom is not simply the absence of companionship. It is the presence of clarity, discernment, and intentionality. She learns to evaluate opportunities, relationships, and decisions through the lens of what truly serves her growth, joy, and well-being, rather than what others might expect or approve of. Every choice becomes a conscious act of self-respect, whether it is deciding whom to trust, which paths to pursue, or how to spend her time and energy. In the absence of social pressures, she develops a sharper sense of judgment, distinguishing between fleeting allure and meaningful impact, between temporary comfort and long-term fulfillment. This freedom allows her to embrace authenticity, making decisions that align with her true self instead of conforming to societal norms or seeking validation. She becomes intentional in creating boundaries, choosing environments and people that uplift and support her rather than drain or diminish her spirit. The practice of choosing wisely fosters confidence, resilience, and independence, as she learns to trust her own intuition and values above all else. In this space of autonomy, she cultivates a life that is deliberate, purposeful, and deeply aligned with who she is at her core, understanding that each choice she makes is both a reflection of her inner strength and a step toward the life she is determined to live on her own terms. A woman with no friend often discovers that self-awareness is one of the most powerful tools she can cultivate, transforming her solitude into a source of insight, clarity, and personal strength. In the quiet of her own company, she has the space to examine her thoughts, emotions, patterns, and motivations without distraction or external influence. She begins to understand not only what drives her, but also what holds her back, the fears, insecurities, and habitual responses that may have limited her growth or clouded her judgment in the past. This deep level of awareness allows her to recognize her triggers and vulnerabilities, to identify the choices that align with her true values, and to navigate life with intentionality rather than impulse. Self-awareness becomes a superpower because it equips her with the ability to respond rather than react, to approach relationships, work, and challenges with insight rather than assumption, and to discern what deserves her energy and attention. She learns to celebrate her strengths while acknowledging her areas for growth, embracing both as integral parts of her identity. This awareness fosters emotional intelligence, enabling her to connect with others authentically and compassionately when she chooses, while also protecting herself from unnecessary harm or influence. It also cultivates resilience because she knows that understanding herself is the foundation for navigating uncertainty, making difficult decisions, and standing firm in her principles. Through self-awareness, she gains a profound sense of empowerment, realizing that the more she understands herself, the more capable she becomes of shaping her life with clarity, integrity, and purpose, and that this inner knowledge is a guiding light that no one else can provide or take away. A woman with no friend often discovers that being alone is not synonymous with being lonely, and that solitude can be a season of preparation, reflection, and growth rather than a permanent state of emptiness. In the absence of constant companionship, she learns to sit with herself, to explore her thoughts, feelings, and desires, and to cultivate a sense of completeness that comes from within rather than from external validation. She realizes that loneliness is not inevitable simply because she is alone. It is a condition shaped by perception, expectation, and attachment, and it can be transformed through self-awareness, self-compassion, and purposeful engagement with life. Being alone gives her the opportunity to develop interests, passions, and skills that are uniquely her own, to understand her values and boundaries, and to build resilience that will serve her in every relationship she encounters. She begins to see that connections with others are most meaningful when they are chosen intentionally, with discernment and authenticity, rather than sought out of fear or social pressure. Alone, she has the clarity to recognize the type of people and relationships that will truly enrich her life, and she learns to wait for these connections without settling for superficial or draining companionship. Over time, she experiences a profound shift in perspective. Solitude is not a void to be feared, but a space to be embraced, a time to cultivate strength, creativity, and self-love. She understands that life's seasons change, that relationships may come and go, and that her ability to thrive independently ensures that when meaningful companionship does arrive, it is experienced from a place of wholeness, confidence, and genuine readiness, rather than need or dependency. In reflecting on the journey of a woman with no friend, we come to understand that solitude is not a mark of weakness, but a crucible for growth, resilience, and self-discovery. Each challenge she faces, each moment of introspection, and each choice she makes in the quiet of her own company shapes her into a woman who knows her worth, trusts her intuition, and embraces her authenticity. She learns that connection is most meaningful when it is intentional, that creativity and strength often emerge from silence, and that emotional resilience and self-awareness are among the greatest gifts one can cultivate alone. Her journey teaches us that being alone does not mean being incomplete, and that the deepest sense of belonging comes from the relationship she nurtures with herself. In the end, a woman with no friend is not defined by the absence of others, but by the fullness of her own spirit, the courage to stand alone, and the wisdom to live a life guided by her values, her passions, and her unwavering sense of self.